Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're going to be working on Unit 2. This is our second full week of class here at Gateway Technical College for 152-101 web programming. And I'm excited because this is the first unit where we start to really code for this class. So this is a very important unit. As I was saying before I hit the record on this session here, that the real basic components of HTML are what we're covering here tonight. And arguably, because they're the most basic ones, are also some of the most important things you're going to learn in this course is what happens really in the next 2-3 weeks, is that introductory material and latching onto it. Last week, if you remember, we did install FTP software, tested our accounts. I also had you do pre-tests on W3 schools to see where your skills are at. We thought about what type of project we want to build. And then we also installed an IDE, right? An IDE, remember, stands for Integrated Development Environment. And we installed, at least during class time, helped somebody install Microsoft's Visual Studio Code, right? And my assumption as you're listening to this session is that you've done that and you have the software up and running on your system and it's functioning just fine. And you've sent me a screenshot that it's working, right? So these are the underpinnings of moving forward. Once again, I will reiterate, you don't have to use the tool that I'm using in class to do your work. Any coding tool will work just fine. And when it comes down to it, and I want you to remember this about any type of coding, regardless of programming language or what you're trying to accomplish, all coding can be accomplished with a basic text editor if need be. That's not usually the desired approach, right? Usually we want a more powerful tool. And so Visual Studio Code is our tool. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to launch Visual Studio Code up on my screen. And I do have it down here in my system tray. And notice that it is coming up. Restricted mode is intended for safe code browsing. Trust this window to enable all features. And so I'm going to manage this if you guys are getting a similar message, and I'm going to trust it. And basically, in other words, if I write code in here that can do something to my system, it's on me. That's really what I'm saying here, right? And that's one of the challenges of working with coding engines, right? You can write code that can really screw you up, right? All right, but rest assured, HTML and CSS are not the type of code that usually can mess with your system too much. When you do get into Visual Studio Code, you will get to learn this interface, and you guys will discover that many of you might be as adept at this interface as I am, because I'll be real frank, this has not been my primary coding tool for web for many, many years. It's just now that I'm switching to it, mostly because of the artificial intelligence work that I'm doing, and mostly in Python, that I've been switching to this tool more and more and liking it for a lot of different things. I am also very keenly aware that out in the industry, this is the predominant coding tool that most web developers are using these days when they're writing code. So my thinking is, why not teach you on the tool that most people are using? Right? Makes sense. That does very clearly indicate, though, there are other tools, right? I have a complete list of them in the previous unit folder, and you can explore those, and you can use any tool you want as long as it works. Whenever you come into the product like this, normally it will throw up a welcome screen like this, and sometimes different announcements, and maybe it auto upgraded itself or something to that effect. And you can summarily usually blow those screens away and just end up in the blank environment, right? We will come back here in a minute, but ultimately what we will end up doing is we will attach to a folder structure that we already have and then start creating files. But first, let's do some other stuff, okay? So let's go back and do some lecture things. Notice this is our topic list for the evening, and we have a lot of stuff to go through, right? And you can see this is a lot of topics to hit, but I assure you we will hit all of them. And one of the things that I, have been letting you know along the way, this is the first time we're offering the course without a textbook, and we still need reference materials. Our primary reference site will be W3 schools. I have it linked up here, right? And then I also have it linked right here, right? And this gives a little description here as to why it's important, right? Remember, the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3, is what we call the standards issuing body for all major web languages, predominantly HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They set the standards for the internet. What are the rules for the language? How should those pieces of code be rendered? They make up the rule set. So why would you go anywhere else for reference? Makes sense, right? It's like going to Webster, and Webster invented the words. So yes, that's the best place to go. W3 Schools does have this secondary tool here called the validator. This one that's linked up here will validate HTML code. There's also a validator for CSS, which we'll explore when we get there. But the general conception is this: you write a bunch of code, and before you publish it, you should check to make sure that it meets the standards defined by the W3. Because if it doesn't, your browser can go into this mode called quirks mode, right? With a Q, right? And meaning that if you don't write your code correctly, it has the option, the browser has the option of saying, you know what, you don't know what you're doing, so we're going to render it any way we want, which to a web developer, generally speaking, is horrible, right? Because we want to have control over what our pages look like. So that's why your code must be valid. The other reason your code has to be valid, okay, when we do basic HTML, I'm going to just tell you right now, you can make a bunch of mistakes, and then you can bring it up in your browser, and the mistakes, I don't see any problems. It looks fine. Seriously, it'll look good. Where it will get bad is when you do start to add CSS to style it. If your tags aren't correctly formed, you will have, your styles will break. Or when you start to add JavaScript, which is programming code that makes your website do something, that will also break if your code's not valid. So that's why it becomes important as a general rule to always create valid HTML code. I'll show you the process for fixing code towards the end of class, and the techniques I think are most effective. But the fact that they have a tool out there where we can validate is marvelous. It really is. It's very, very helpful. All right, let's get into the lecture notes. And I'm going to use this as kind of my, let's say in lieu of a PowerPoint, in lieu of a textbook, right? And my general expectation, and I say this for everybody here in the class, especially those attending the Zoom session, when I publish each unit, I'm going to try to get this material out as early as possible so that before you come to the next class, you should have read through this material. When we get to class, like this week, I have a couple of lecture things, like the stuff at the beginning here is kind of lecture, we're not really coding at first. But as we get into the subsequent units, it's all going to be about coding. So I'll say, here's a new tag, here's a new style, here's a new technique, here's a new tool, and then we'll do it. But if you read up on it in advance and maybe even experiment with it a little bit, when we get into doing it in class, you will be ready to roll. So that's my expectation, is that you'll read the lecture notes before class and then try some of the stuff if you can before class. And then when we do it for real, if you have questions about it or concerns about it, or it's not working right or whatever, I will be there to guide you. All right, let's talk about this concept of web development. It is definitely an interesting niche in the IT world, right? Web development, in essence, is to create stuff for the internet. Now, think about this really carefully. How much time every day do you spend either on your phone or a tablet or a computer or whatever at work, in social settings even, and you're on the internet? Constant, right? A lot of the apps that we use, right, and we think are apps, often are glorified web pages that have an icon on your phone to launch the web page, right? So often what we think of as an app is really actually web content. And a lot of apps are built with web type tools, right? Not necessarily simplistic ones like the ones we're starting with, but still, in essence, a lot of the stuff that you see on your phone is basically glorified web pages. When we write code, we call that process, typically software development. So we're writing code to generate stuff for a computer. What's interesting about web development is we are not writing code for our operating system. So I'm not writing code to work within Windows. I'm writing code to work within a web browser, right? And let's think about this here. What are the major web browsers? Okay, let's name them. Google Chrome, probably the most popular. Firefox. We have Edge from Microsoft. We have Safari from Apple. And I think I mentioned this last week. Chrome, Edge, and Safari all use the Google Chrome browser engine. So they basically all work the same. They have a different skin, but they're basically the same browser. Can anybody think of any other browsers aside from the four I just mentioned? I mentioned Google, Firefox, Edge, Google Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Safari are the ones I mentioned. Can anybody mention another browser? You can put it in the chat if that works for you. If you don't want to be in the recording, I totally get it. So I'm going to be kind of goofy about this, but like, okay, major browsers. Okay, Chrome, probably the most popular. Firefox, built on the original code for Netscape, right? So Netscape was the first commercial graphical browser. What I always tell people is the precursor to Firefox was Netscape, and then the precursor to Netscape was a product called Mosaic. Very, very interestingly, that web browser was written down in the state of Illinois at the University of Urbana-Champaign at the National Computing Center for Supercomputing or something like that. The two guys that wrote the original graphical browser were two guys from Wisconsin. How do you like that? Right? So Wisconsin guys made the first graphical browser. They didn't make the first web browser. The first web browser was actually created by Tim Berners-Lee, and it's a product called Lynx, Lynx. And that was a text-only browser. The two Wisconsin guys, I always forget their name, they took that idea, turned it into a graphical browser where you could see images and click with your mouse. And then they turned that idea into a browser called Mosaic, which then became Netscape, which then became Firefox. So the original browser that's graphical in a way still exists in the form of Firefox, right? Chrome, Edge, and Safari all use the same rendering engine underneath. But there are some other notable other browsers. One of the more notable ones actually is Opera. This is one that's been around a really, really long time and actually is responsible for like some big innovations in browsers like tabs, right? Like we have browsers and we have like 50 million tabs open. Well, Opera was the first one that had tabs. Firefox was the first one where you could see the source code. I also argue that Firefox probably has the best web developer tools, but all of them also have web developer tools on the back end. We'll learn about those later. There are many, many, many other web browsers. Can somebody name even one other web browser? All right. I'm just going to type one in here. Brave. Brave's another Chrome variant, one I like quite a bit, and I use it. It's kind of a privacy browser, but it has built into it anti-tracking, ad blocking, et cetera, by default, and it works beautifully, and I use it for those purposes. There's also a browser called Dolphin out there. I think that's mostly mobile.
We've been adding some to the chat window.
Okay, thank you. DuckDuckGo has a browser. Bing is a search engine. Okay, Opera GX. Well, it's like a subversion of Opera. I don't remember Yahoo ever having a browser. I'm trying to think of other major browsers. There are more, folks, so, and just because there's certain ones that are popular, you don't have to use the ones that are popular. What I will tell you is that what I see out in the workplace with people who really do this stuff, the two primary browsers that people use for development, hands down, are Chrome and Firefox in that order, right? Most developers use Chrome because they know the audience also uses Chrome and or Firefox. And Firefox does have a developer's version available. So it's different than the normal version, and they build in extra tools for that. You can explore that on your own, but later in the course, I'll kind of introduce you to it. Now, the reason I bring up browsers, right? Because we're coding for the web. If you're on a Windows machine, you should load as many of these as you can. You can't load Safari on Windows anymore. You used to be able to, right? But at a minimum, I would have Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Opera. I would probably do Brave. I'll be frank, I don't know if I have Opera on my system right now. I don't think I do. If you don't want to do all that installing, then I would stick with at least those three. If you're on a Mac, you can't do Edge, but you can do Firefox and Chrome. So then Safari is, if you're not aware of this, the primary browser on a Mac. Okay, so those are just really good things to know. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that. When we write code for the web, we write the code that puts the stuff into the web browser, whatever the fancy mechanism is. We learned last week that I can right-click any web page in a blank spot on the page and look at the source code that creates that page. This is what's putting the stuff on the screen. It cannot be obscured from you as a visitor to that web page or opening up that web content, right? How it was generated, that's a whole separate story. But the stuff that we see on the screen in front of us in the browser, we consider that the front end. This is the part that the users see what is in the browser. So they're on their computer, ideally on the internet. They're connecting up to your content on the internet, and the code that you wrote or helped to develop is pushing content to the screen. It reads that code in the background and puts it on the front end of your browser. It's what you see. It's like the car coming at you. It's the front end. So when we talk about front end development, we're talking about creating content that sits in the browser that people can see, right? And when we start coding for HTML, this is what we code first, right? HTML and CSS control the front end. HTML will create the structure and content, and CSS will control the styling and behavior of the website. Now, when we think about front-end development, we call this typically the client side because there's this scenario where we put our files, right? We've already started talking about this. We upload our files to the web server. The web server runs a piece of software that is called web server software that runs on the server. That's job is to receive requests from the internet, like saying, hey, can you load up Roseanne's page? Sure, here's Roseanne's page, and it sends it back to you. The browser receives that code that we saw and then reads the instructions in the code and puts it on the screen. Now, think about how quickly this happens. You hit a website, type a URL, press enter, goes to the server, asks for the page returns, sent back to your browser, and comes up on screen. And if it doesn't load like that, you're frustrated. But meanwhile, like, where did that traffic even go on the internet? Could have went around the planet twice by the time it got back to your screen. And we get frustrated because it doesn't load up in 1 second, right? So just to give you an idea, like, be patient sometimes and stuff is loading. But the concept, right, that we are connecting to servers on the internet that hold the content, and then there's a separate type of coding that we do on a server called server-side coding that allows us to control what happens on the server when a web page is requested. That might do things like we write programming code to maybe do math or control content or access a database or something of that nature. And so we have two different styles of coding. When we start out, we're learning client-side coding. We're learning front-end development. They have a little analogy here, right, that I think is kind of interesting. Think of the front end as the dining room of a restaurant. It's the part the customer experiences, the decor, the menu, the seating, the presentation of the food, how nice the host was, all that stuff, right? Have you ever walked into a place and it's like, oh man, this place is dirty, or it's spooky, or there's nobody in here, that kind of thing. That's like a bad front end. But you go into a nice restaurant and it looks good, and you kind of have the thought, okay, well, the food must be good too, right? So that's controlled separately. The technologies that drive the front end: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, what's interesting about that, those are the three primary web languages, and those three languages together in concert really form a majority of all web content, those three languages. This course is focused on learning the first two. This is the introductory course to both of those, right? So the front end is responsible for the visual presentation, layout, and interactivity of the site. Now, the back end development, when we're writing code for the server, it says it refers to the part of the website that the users don't see. So when I go to a website, let's say I go to Amazon.com and I look up a product, and then I click on a review, or I put it in my shopping cart, all the stuff that you do on a website. I don't care what logic or what code was written on the back end to make all that work. I just expect it to work. Like if I go to Facebook and hit the like button, well, it better like it, right? Like who knows what programming code is doing that on the back end, but that's a different type of coding. We teach you that type of coding here too. So basically, back end development is responsible for storing and organizing data, processing the user requests, like logging in or making a purchase, and ensuring everything on the client side works. So the server side often might generate the code for the front end. This is really kind of an interesting thought. So if I go to a website, for example, if I log in to a website and like username, password, I'm going to get a different screen than if I don't, right? The server side says, okay, well, you logged in. Okay, so you can go into the website. But if you don't log in correctly, then it's either try again or get out of here, right? So the analogy on this one is the back end is the kitchen of the restaurant. It's where the food is prepared, the ingredients are stored, the orders from the dining room are processed. And no, we don't want the customers going into the kitchen, because maybe if they saw how the food was made, they wouldn't want it. Or, we don't want them getting in the way, or it's unclean or whatever. But that's a really nice analogy. When you start coding it for backend, you use different technologies. So for example, Python, right? PHP, Ruby, Java, database technologies like MySQL and Postgres are very commonly used backend tools for powering websites. You will learn a majority of this stuff in this web program, right? As you move on, not in this course though, right? So the other nice little link that they have here, and this is from W3 Schools, and I do want you guys to read this, where they talk about what is a web development, and they kind of give you these little roadmaps and stuff. And I want you to notice, right? Create your web page, style your page, and then make your web page interactive. And that's a super high level overview of what this stuff is, right? So just be mindful of that. All right, so a little more terminology here before we get into the code, and we talk about how the internet really works, right? So we think about this concept of client and server, right? The server is out on the internet somewhere. It's in the cloud, right? That's how we think of it. So when we refer to the cloud or the internet as a cloud, well, really, truly, we are actually connecting to a real physical computer. So when we put stuff on Prometheus, it's really a machine. And if you came to the IMET campus in Sturtevant, I could walk you up to it. You could touch it if you want. And you go, oh, look, it's turned on and the lights are on, right? And so when you're connecting to that machine, you think of it as being in the cloud. But the reality is, anytime you're dealing with anything on the cloud, there is a real physical machine behind it. And servers are what we call them, right? So they run their own operating systems. They run software. They allow us to store information. Sometimes they're running programs that make the websites work, all that stuff. The clients in this case become the web browser. And that's why it is important for every web developer, I think, to have as many web browsers on their machine as possible for testing. I will also argue that you should also, not that you have to do this immediately, as a web developer, I always made sure I had a PC, I had a Mac, I had a Linux machine, a tablet, and a phone. And then whenever I would build a website, I would test it on all those devices, right? It is a lot easier these days, and I'm just telling you this up front, to create content that looks consistently good across all the platforms. Usually the challenge is, can I make it look good on my desktop and my phone at the same time? And it's kind of regardless of browser these days, but I would still load up as many browsers as possible. So our client is the web browser. Web browsers natively support HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are the native languages. The servers can do a lot more, and then they send the pages to our clients for rendering. When we're on the internet and we hit a URL, like up here in our address bar, and we were talking about this before, like we don't see the HTTP at the beginning here, but at the beginning of just about every web address, it's either HTTP, more unusual these days, or usually HTTPS, meaning secure, followed by a colon and 2 forward slashes, and then your web address. HTTP is an acronym which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, meaning it is the transmission rule set for how web page information is transmitted across the internet. The Hypertext Transfer Protocol operates over a network port of port 80. That's the default. So whenever you got a web page, you're using, like, I think of it as a channel. Channel 80 on the internet, basically, is where all the web pages go. All network connections over TCP/IP have over 65,000 possible ports or channels, if you will. And the internet's port is port 80. When you switch to HTTPS, the default port, I think, becomes port 465 or something weird like that. That's just the standard for the internet. When you type in a URL, or you paste one into your address bar there, that will locate the machine on the internet. And the way that it formally works is this part of the domain name that you see here, right? So this is brightspace.com. That's a domain name. It goes to a domain name server on the internet. It looks up brightspace.com. It converts it to a numerical address, an IP address, and then it transports you to that machine and then looks for this resource. When we write static HTML, that part I highlighted is a file and folder structure. When you write dynamic web page code, it's really symbolic more than a folder and file structure. But when you do static, which is what we're doing, it's file and folder structure. So for example, that would be a folder, 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 and that would be a file, or that'd probably be a folder too. But this is just the anatomy of the URL. A URL, that acronym stands for Universal Resource Locator. The point of it is to take the name that we use that makes sense to us as human beings, that gets converted to a number, and the domain name system knows where the server is that holds that web page, right? But ultimately, we are connecting to a physical machine somewhere that holds that web page information. Ironically, most of the world's web servers, even if you're hitting a web server from a different country, most of them are located here in the United States. I just want to kind of blow that off, the lid. There's places like India and China and other places that do have their own servers, but we have the biggest IT infrastructure here. So a lot of times foreign websites are on US soil. Pretty weird, right? So go figure. All right. So HTTP is the method that we send information across the internet. They have a little simple example. So like you go to the browser and you type www.google.com. And by the way, we're in the era now where the www part really doesn't matter anymore, right? So don't type that. I always tell people, just type google.com. In fact, don't even type google.com, just type Google. It'll still take you there. Right? Right. Yeah, you guys have figured that out, I'm sure, already. Informally, and we're going to talk about this part of the domain name, google.com, is formally the domain name. the beginning part is technically what we call a subdomain, right? And we'll talk about these concepts later. All right, so you type that in, your browser sends that request to Google servers. In truth, there's other servers in between. We have domain name servers that get in the mix first. So it's kind of going to the library and looking up something in the card catalog, and it tells you where to go. You know, that's the analogy. And then you go to the shelf and you actually get the resource, right? Google server receives the request and sends back the correct file or files. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And then you get what we call an HTTP response. So you do a request when you type something in the address bar, and then you get a response when it shows up in the browser. When you have the response, remember, you can do the right click view source and you can see what the response was. Here's the response that Brightspace sent back to me, right? And the fact that you can see it, I think, is cool, right? See what makes it up. Your browser reads that code and then renders it according to what's said in that code file. So we'll be creating code files that will make stuff look hopefully just as nice on the web. Right. All right, so now we're going to start digging into the language that allows us to write the code. And this language is called hypertext markup language. And we're going to hit this first piece here, and then we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and full on code. But I want to talk about this as a concept. HTML, once again, so this is an acronym you have to know as a web developer, right? And this, I'm just telling you right now, this is on the midterm and on the final exam. The question like, what does HTML stand for? And the answer is hypertext markup language. I think what's really fascinating about hypertext as a concept is the person who originally thought it up, and I apologize, I don't remember the guy's name, but this is back in the, I think either late 30s or early 40s, came up with this concept. It's like, hey, I'm reading this book and this has so much like weird language in it and these weird references. And I have no context for this. It would be so cool that like, if first of all, the author would have put in footnotes so that when he says this weird word, I know what it is, or if they could put in a footnote with like a reference on where I could go read up on it. Right. So the concept was like, wouldn't it be neat if we just had a book where I could just like, I don't know what this word is, and I could touch the word and then it would tell me what the meaning of the word is, or it could take me to a place where I could research more. Like, so somebody's thinking about this with paper. This is the person that thought about this concept to begin with was thinking about it on paper. Because I don't know if you guys have ever done that, like taking out a book and you read and it's like, I don't know this word. And then you end up Googling it or something, right, to figure it out. Books that know that their stuff is weird put footnotes in or tell you what it means, right? But okay, so that's kind of where the concept comes from. So when Tim Berners-Lee came up with the concept of building a web browser, what he was really doing is he was finding a way to take stuff that was on different servers on the internet and then find an easy way to be able to link to them. Like he's like, all right, if I want to go to this one server and get a file, I have to go here, I got to log in, I got to know the folders, and I got to click on this and click on that, and then I get there. But if I can work that out as a link, wouldn't it be cool if I could just take that link and put it in my document and I could just click on it and then go there, right? I wouldn't have to remember the password or the folder or the file name or worry about spelling it wrong or any of that stuff. So his concept is that he would take a conceptual resource and then create a simplified link to get to it. So that's what hypertext is really all about. And hypertext really kind of, takes on full meaning. Like, what good is an internet page that doesn't link to something? Right? No good at all, right? But the fact that you can do it is really neat. So they came up with a way to build a language to allow us to put in links and to structure the content of our page. So in essence, when we think about building websites, a really good example for building websites is building documents and print materials, right? Because a lot of the concepts for publishing content was already kind of figured out before the internet came around. People were printing newspapers and magazines and books and brochures and flyers and all sorts of stuff way before the internet was invented. And people figured out, like, for example, and I'm going to use this as an example often, like this website here for the Boston Globe, which is a very notable news publication here in the United States. and I use this site as an example for a couple of reasons. I'm going to get rid of the ad as much as I can. But this website kind of looks like a newspaper, right? Right. They got like a, the old English type. They got a heading at the top, and then there's kind of like sort of like a menu, and then they have these very narrow columns, and they have photographs, and they have a whole lot of information, and you can tell what information is really important because it's at the top, right, above the fold of the newspaper, as they say. The most important stories are probably near the top of the page. What those stories are about, there's like a title, and then there's a little bit of a abstract or synopsis, right? But there's a format here that works. Some fonts are bigger, some are smaller, some content is more prominent, it's organized, it's easy to look at, it's structured, right? And this, so the idea of publishing content to the internet really kind of stems from the print world. And when they decided to build the markup language for the web, they looked to this technology called SGML, right? And SGML is a language that pre-existed HTML, and you can see how far back it goes. First developed by IBM in the 1960s, and then it became a standard in 1986. And that was right around the time that a lot of newspapers, when they were printing newspapers, I want you to think about this, they would do handset type to print newspaper. And they would literally take little pieces of lead that had the letters upside down and backwards and put them into these little things in order. So like if you wrote an article, there would literally be a person that would manually take every little piece, every letter, every heading, every different font, every italic, all the stuff that like you would print on paper, and set every little piece of type in a little form. And then they'd put it into a machine, they would roll ink on it, and they'd run it across a piece of paper, ink it, paper, over and over and over again. And, so like when a newspaper reporter would write an article, they would have a deadline, like, I don't know, 7 p.m. for the next morning's paper, because they'd have to have the articles all typed up and they'd give it to the people that would do this, and they would put it on the press. Eventually, they came up with systems where somebody didn't have to do this by hand. They would do it where the machine would pick the type and put it in the machine. And then later on, they're like, man, this is a waste of time. This takes forever. So they came up with this concept of electronic prepress that required this SGML language. And basically what the SGML language did is it allowed you to put words on a page. And then it's like, well, if I want this to be a heading, I can put little tags around it that would just say, hey, this is a heading, so make a bigger font. Or this is important, so make it italic. Or, this product is on sale, so make that red. That kind of thing. And so they came up with a markup language. And then that language completely changed printing, right? Because now you didn't have to have a guy moving little lead pieces of type around. Now you could do it with a computer and send it right to the press, and the press would do it correctly. And then somebody's like, well, if we put stuff on the web, that's kind of like publishing a document, right? So all the nomenclature of that goes with it. And so we publish for the web, and we use these two technologies, HTML, which is really a subset of XML, which came from SGML, right? So, right. But ultimately, the parent language for all markup languages is SGML. Later on, it became XML, and XML allows you to create HTML and a bunch of other languages. So that's kind of the rabbit hole. Okay. So HTML then basically tells the browser what each piece of content is. For example, this is a heading, this is a paragraph, or this is an image. And then it says the analogy, if a website were a house, HTML would be the wooden frame and foundation. It provides the essential structure, but not the paint, furniture, or electricity. That's where CSS and JavaScript come in, right? So my standard thing I always tell my students, HTML is structure and content. So like the words on the page are in HTML. But really, truly, the HTML code does provide really the framework that you're building into. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we're going to start coding. So I'm going to pause the recording here for a moment. Okay, we're back from break and we are going to get into coding here in just a moment, but it's time to launch our coding tool and to make sure that our file structure is set up for us to code. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to go into my file system here, and I've preemptively opened up a window where I store all the work that I put into my account on the Prometheus server. Now, you'll notice that I do have a lot of folders in here already. So I have all my old work is in this account, and I'm not going to delete it, by the way. I want it to stay there to persist so that I can use like older like things that I did as examples for newer classes. So for you, what you might be looking at here, this might be the equivalent of your gateway folder, and then somewhere inside there you have a folder for web programming. I do want to just make special mention, when you start putting stuff on a web server, there's a convention that web developers use, and the convention is when we create static HTML, we tend to name all the folders and files all lowercase, right? And I want to be very clear on this, not a rule, a convention, a common practice. One reason to follow a convention is then you never have to guess at how you name stuff. You know, that's one reason. However, the one spot where it is an absolute rule is that index.html file, and that's one of the first files we're going to create again, must be all lowercase and spelled exactly correct with no variations. Otherwise, it will not load. So just be mindful of that. And most notably, it won't load on a remote server. So pretend for a moment that this folder is empty and I'm inside my gateway folder, and I'm now going to make a new folder for the work I'm about to do this semester for this class. I'm going to call my folder web prog. That's my choice. I can call it whatever I want. Doesn't really matter. Notice all lowercase, no spaces. And then I'm adding a little extension to it, -FA25, which stands for Fall Semester 2025. So when I look at it later, I know what I'm looking at. I see how that's useful for me. For you, you might just call this web programming because you're just going to take it once. Inside this folder is where I'm going to store all my work. Like, you may already have a folder created, right? No worries. Even if it has spaces in the file name, it will still work, but you can't always count on that. So what I always caution people is when you're moving files and folders to the server, you're usually better off no spaces in the file name. Right. Inside this folder, we're going to be working on Unit 2 today. So I'm going to create a Unit 2 folder. Once again, all lowercase, no spaces. And so this is going to become my workspace inside of Visual Studio. So what I'm going to do inside of Visual Studio Code is I'm going to attach to this folder structure, and that way that will be present in the product. But in order for that to work, these folders must pre-exist, right? Not that you can't do it from Visual Studio Code, but my way of looking at it is I'm better off building it in the file structure first, and then I can attach to it with a piece of software and then manage it further. All right, so now that I have a folder structure and I know where I'm going to put my stuff for tonight, I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. I've already gotten rid of the welcome screen, right? We did that earlier. And I am going to go full screen with the product. And I'm probably zoomed in a little bit. I am not even sure. Okay, so now I'm back to 100% zoom. With this interface, when you're looking at it like this, we don't really see anything, but we do notice that we have menus across the top. We have a toolbar on the side, and a bunch of stuff that we can add to this, and we can custom tweak it and adjust it in many different ways. I'm not saying new to the product, but new enough where I might not be such an expert on like arranging it on the screen as much as like some of my older products. The toolbar on the side here, I want you to notice, has a few different icons, and the topmost icon is what they call the Explorer icon. I'm going to click on that, and you'll notice it brings up a panel on the side here. And when you're working on a coding project, it is really, really smart to attach to the spot where your files are stored. rather than try to do it after the fact. So a really good way to go is you've pre-created your folders, and now I'm going to open a folder, right? And where am I going to go? I put my stuff on my Google Drive. Now, remember, this is not even on my local machine, right? Which is kind of clever. For you, this might be your documents folder. Then I'm going to go to the spot where I keep all my web pages, right? And this is the folder I was looking at before. And if you remember, I created this folder, Web Programming Fall 25. I'm going to open that folder. And I could go into the unit 2, but here's my thinking. If I open it here, then I can always come back to this folder and all my unit folders will be here. You know, because later I'll have a unit 3 and a unit 4 and etc. So I'm in the folder I want to be in. I'm going to select folder. All right. Now I see my unit 2 folder here in the sidebar, and I'm expanding it. Of course, it's empty because guess what? There's no file inside there, right? Right. So we're going to begin by creating a new file. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code to do this, right? And I'm going to type in a new file name right here. So I'm going to type in index.html. Notice all lowercase. I didn't mistakenly make the I a capital. Right. Once I have typed in, I'm going to press enter. It's asking where it wants me to store it. Okay, so this is to save it right off the bat. I want to put it in my unit 2 folder, and then I'm going to create the file. Okay, now, very interestingly, I don't know if you guys are catching this. Oh, there's a build with agent mode, and here's the temptation with Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code has a side panel that includes an AI panel. So AI is built directly into the product, folks. All right. Now, generally speaking, we're not going to use this, at least not initially. Eventually, I will get to the point where I encourage you to use it. Now is not the time. All right, we're in HTML mode now. So what we do inside here, we will start to generate a brand new web page. But really, I know it looks like there's stuff inside here, but this is like just filler content. And so the moment I start typing, it goes away, right? So really, I have a blank document here. Now, you'll see this in the lecture notes. And oh boy, all right. So it said generate code, and here's a temptation. It can totally generate a web page for you, but we want to learn the fundamentals. So the first thing that we'll learn as we're coding HTML, and I'm gonna zoom way in on my screen here so you guys can see this really clearly. Maybe a little too much, sorry. That's probably good right there. The first thing I'm going to type is a set of brackets, right? So when we work with HTML code, we use the less than and greater than sign. So that's the shift of the comma key and the period key. And those two tags, and I'm trying to get away from the IntelliSense here, are kind of the outward boundaries of any tag that we create. And then the first tag that we're going to create here is one called the doc type. So it starts with an exclamation point. And then formally, you're supposed to use capital letters, but I'm going to tell you it doesn't really matter at all. And I tend to do all lowercase here also. And we type the word doc type, no spaces. It's preceded by an exclamation point. So open bracket, exclamation, doc type. And you'll notice here, one of the reasons why I want you to use this product. The rest of the stuff that I see on this line, HTML and the closing bracket, is being recommended by the coding engine. And really what I should do is I should type in exactly what it says. Or, and I'm just going to point out, I can hit tab key and it does it automatically. And what I just did, I just hit the tab key twice and it built the basic structure of an HTML page, just like what I show in the content there. Now, this doesn't give you the hands-on feel of coding it from scratch. Okay, so I'm going to Control Z as an undo, and I'm just going to manually close that tag. Now, as this product will do automatically, it will keep prompting you because the kind of code we're creating is very, very common. So when I'm creating a HTML document, that's the first line you must put in on every document. What is the importance of the doc type? The doc type tells the web browser what set of rules we're following. Okay. So it's telling the browser, hey, browser, we're creating an HTML5 document. Its doc type is declared as doctype.html or doctype HTML. All right. I'm going to go back to the lecture notes here for just a moment. And I just want you to notice that the rest of the standard structure of an HTML document includes a couple of very key tags. And I would want to point out what they are first, and then we'll go code them. So we start with our doc type. Notice this one's all caps here, right? That's kind of an old standard, but it is the standard. Then we go to an HTML tag. Notice opening and closing brackets. But then we have another HTML tag down here. And you notice with this HTML tag that the second one starts with a / inside the brackets. That tells the browser the HTML code starts here and ends here. So this is an opening tag. This is a closing tag. And just about every type of tag that we do will have an opening, notice, opening and closing, opening and closing, opening and closing, right? You see the pattern. So you just have the tag name at first, and then the tag name preceded by a /. There are some exceptions. In the rules of HTML, any tag that's opened needs to be closed. The doc type declaration is one of the exceptions. There's a few others, and I'll show you those as we go, right? But what I want you to notice as we're doing this is an HTML document always starts with the doc type. If you omit this, the browser can make up its own rules. Usually it's HTML5, but you can't count on that, and it might blow apart your page. So this is required on every page. Then we have the HTML tag, and I'm drawing a thing around it, and everything that's on your page, the entire contents of your document are in between those two tags. Then the document breaks into two major portions. First, we have the head section, and then we have the body section. And what I tell my students is the body section contains the visible parts of the page, the stuff that the people see in the browser. That appears down here. Then we have the head section of the page. And in principle, this is what I think of as the non-seen or the unseen part of the page, right? It's not like what's in the browser window, but what happens here is important. It's not the heading of the document, mind you. It's the head section. I don't know why they chose that as a thing, right? Like this is not where the heading of your document goes. However, you can put a title tag in here, and the title tag dictates what displays in the tab of the web page you create. So when I would load this page, my tab would say page title, right? Other things that we put in the head of the document, CSS style sheets, JavaScript code, other special directives, and links to things, basically is what we put in the head section. But it's not stuff that necessarily ends up on the page. In the body section, that's where you put your words, your images, your videos, that stuff, the stuff you actually see. All right, let's go back to the coding engine now and actually allow it to help us build the code. And so here I am. I just completed my doc type, and you notice I got rid of that superfluous bracket, but it's actually suggesting a thing that we should add in, which it says HTML. So it's asking me to add the HTML tag, and then it's adding a thing that we call an attribute. And this is considered a standard requirement on web pages. And that is to set the baseline language for the web page. All right. Yes, we're in the United States. And yes, typically we speak English, right? And so what this is telling us, this is an attribute for a tag, right? When it's inside the tag, we're setting the default language to English. If you omit this, English is the assumed language. And I want you guys to be really think about this. This is kind of interesting. If I was living in China and wanted to learn how to make web pages, I would first have to learn English, and then I would have to write my web pages because the tags for web pages in China are still written in English. You can use Chinese language on the page, but they have to learn English to learn how to do the tags. How's that for thank God we invented it. Otherwise, we'd have to learn Chinese to make web pages, right? So you can imagine how they feel, right? Anytime you create a tag, by the way, and you put it on your screen, you should always create the closing tag for it automatically. So normally what I would do is I would do this, right? And you notice how it helps me complete it. And then really that's not where this tag should be. So normally I would split it and then get all the rest of the stuff in there. It just can't help but try to help me. You notice what's happening here? And here's what I'm going to encourage you guys to do. I want you to be aware of the correct structure, but I don't want you to be afraid to let the tool build the structure for you. This is the correct structure. We have our doc type. Remember what I did before? We have our HTML tag up here and at the bottom, just like in the example. Then we have the head section of the document and the body section of the document. The head is the non-visible part. The body is the visible part of the page. Inside the head section, yes, Rachel, please go ahead and ask.
What are you doing to get it to show this code? Because
The autocomplete.
yeah,
I'm wondering if I might have extensions installed that are doing that. Now, if you're manually typing this stuff, I apologize because you don't have the same extensions. And maybe we should talk about that. Over here on the sidebar, and I want to get rid of this toolbar because you guys, it's probably in your way. There's this little extension panel that you can add extra tools to this environment. When I must have done this a while ago, I must have added and I'm trying to think of which one I HTML. See, I don't have a lot of these. You can only see the ones that are uninstalled here. And maybe what I should do here is actually uninstall. I'm trying to find the ones that are installed. You're catching me a little off guard here on this.
sorry.
No, it's okay. Are the rest of you also not having IntelliSense on yours, or have others of you already enabled it? Nobody else is responding, so I really don't know.
It's enabled for me.
Okay, it is enabled for you by default.
Yeah.
Did you enable it yourself?
No.
So Rachel, I'm not really sure what's up with yours. All right. So you might have to do it the old fashioned way where you actually type it in. It really is not a big deal. But if you do have the tool available, and once again, I want to try to figure out, oh, here we go, enabled, right? This is what I want. Yeah, so I do have this installed, so that might be one of the problems. But that might not be the entirety of it. I don't really see a lot of HTML stuff in here, honestly. So I'm thinking it must be the standard. It's either IntelliCode as the extension, Of course, I have Copilot in there too, but I really don't necessarily have like an IntelliSense tool for HTML. It might be kind of automatic, is kind of where I'm kind of thinking that that's happening. If, and I'm saying this to everybody listening to the recording, because this is just, you know, flying by the seat of our pants here. The ideal is really, you know, what I tell students is the first time you code a page, you really should hand code it. You will notice that it's throwing in a couple things that go beyond the example on our lecture notes. And I do want to talk about those. And one of them was this language thing. So this is considered like something you should normally add to a page. But once again, if you omit this, it's automatically assumed and set to English. The other one that is really a good idea to add is this special tag called a meta tag that's designed to declare what we call the character set, or which font set are you using to create your page. For the most part, every web page on the planet uses the same font set, which is the UTF-8. Built into that font set are all the major alphabets of the planet, including, you know, like English and Spanish and, you know, all the European languages and Arabic and Hebrew and the kanji characters and, you know, a lot of Mandarin Chinese and all that stuff is in there, right? Now, once again, if you omit this tag, this will be assumed as the default. But some people are saying pages operate better when you declare your character set. There's another meta tag that was dropped in here, and we are going to talk about this one, but I am going to remove that one for now. And basically what that one does is it makes sure that when you land on your page, the zoom level is set to 100%. Right, that's the point of the one I just deleted. The next tag inside the head section is the title tag. Now, once again, when I create a page, and let's say my theme for this semester is Green Bay Packers, right? So just kind of getting ready for the game tonight. That title will appear in the browser tab in my browser when the page is rendered. Right? So it kind of gets the screen, but it's not in the window, it's the tab. For right now, that's all we're going to put in the head section of the document. Later on, we will add other things here. But be mindful, the head section of the document has an opening tag and a closing tag. From there, we move to the body section. And I'm going to show you one thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight all this code that all sits inside the HTML tag, and see how it's all highlighted at the same time. And I'm going to press my tab key and it's all going to shift together at the same time. Neat little trick, right? So I'm indenting it because what I'm trying to show to you guys is that the head tag and all the tags inside the head tag, right, are inside the HTML tag. And when you do indenting, that helps to show you the hierarchy of your document. Do you have to do that? No, you don't. HTML in browser windows, you could write all your HTML in one line of text if you want, and it would still work just fine, by the way. What we're doing here is we're getting the standard underpinnings of the page. In the body section, this is where we begin to code our content. I'm going to begin with something, oh my God, I'm kind of blown away at like the autocomplete that it's pulling up. It's like giving me content on top of this is AI at work, folks. And normally I would just bypass this, but I'm going to borrow from it a little bit. I am going to create a tag called the H1 tag, which is a good place to start. Then I am going to type Green Bay Packers, and then I'm going to type the closing H1 tag, number / and then the tag. This is going to become a heading on the web page. From there, I'm going to add, oh my God, it's hard not to accept the autocomplete here. So I'm going to let it generate some content for me. And what it's doing right now is it's creating paragraphs for me. But are you guys noticing that it's going off the edge of the screen? That's kind of a bummer, right? Well, one thing you can do is you can close the Explorer so you don't have to look at your files, but it's still going off the edge of the screen. And so you can come up here to the menus and go to the View menu. And right at the bottom of the View menu, there's a feature called Word Wrap. And notice the shortcut key, Alt Z, if you want to do that instead, and that will wrap the content. Now, granted, I have AI running in the background here and it generated this content for me. And it's mostly about accelerating the workflow here. But I created a paragraph of text, and this, I don't know if they're pulling it from Wikipedia or somewhere like that, probably. But notice that the paragraph has an opening tag and a closing tag, and that a paragraph is denoted by the lowercase p. I do want you to notice that all tags in HTML are written in lowercase letters. All right. I don't know where this was going, but I'm going to delete that. I think I have enough content here for now. Oh my God, it just keeps giving me more and more content. It's kind of blowing my mind. Stop it, AI, right? Yeah, totally stop it. All right, but it's giving me some content. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to save this file. When you're in Visual Studio Code, your work is not saved when this little icon here is a dot or a circle. When I go to the file menu and do a save, it turns back to an X. The moment I make an edit, it turns back to a circle. The shortcut key for saving, or keystroke command, is holding down the control key and pressing the letter S. Control S to save. And that's another thing I do in my videos, by the way, is when I'm coding, I'll say that a lot. I'll go Control S to save. And then the document is saved. All right, now comes the fun part, folks. All right. We've created a web page. That web page is in my file folder. So if I go back to my file system here and open up my folder, there it is. I can double click that file here on my own system and it opens in the browser. And here's the web page I just created, right? I can see the words on the screen. Granted, it's not pretty yet, but the words made it to the screen, and I will zoom in so you can see them better, right? And if I right click and view source, I will see the exact code that I created in this interface, right? Okay, but this is on my local machine, right? And that's what we typically do as web developers, by the way, is we create files on our local machine, we load them up in our browser and take a look and go, okay, yeah, looks good. Next. So we now have created a heading and a paragraph, and we're going to start adding more to this now. All right. Since we're on the topic of headings, there's multiple levels for headings. We have what we call an H1 heading here, which is the top level of heading, the biggest one, but there's also an H2 and an H3, right? And you see it's kind of like auto-filling content. Maybe we could say NFC Central for the H2, and I don't know, historic Lambeau. Let's see if I can spell it. Lambeau Field. Thank you, AI. All right. And the point here is I've just added two heading levels now. And I will also point out the fact that the heading tags have 6 different levels. You can go H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. From a very practical standpoint, I usually never go beyond an H3. This I always tell my students that. When I save this, I'm doing Control S to save, and then I'm bouncing back over to my browser, and now I'm doing a refresh. A refresh you can do by just clicking the refresh button. You can right click and reload, or Control R to refresh. So this is a heading level 1, heading level 2, heading level 3. See, as you go down, they get a little smaller, but they're larger than the regular paragraph text. So this would be considered normal text. The paragraph is basically the normal text that we put on a web page. Okay, so we have headings defined and we have paragraphs defined. I'm going to jump back to our lecture notes now, because now we're starting to get down in here and we start talking about what tags are, and we start talking about what elements are. So a tag is the stuff that we've been creating. So for example, we created a paragraph tag and then a closing paragraph tag. So those are the tags. When we put stuff inside of a tag, the content in combination with the tag, we call that an element. So it's like an object now, right? It's not only a paragraph, but it's a paragraph that's got words. So it becomes an element. Then we have a thing called an attribute, and that's where we add stuff like this inside of a tag. So we already did that too, right? So if you go back here, this would be an attribute. This would be an attribute. And if you look at what an attribute is we're adding something to the tag to make it do other stuff, or to give it a name, or to label it, or give it an instruction, or some other feature, right? But that's called an attribute. And, the terminology is not super important, but it's kind of helpful. Another thing that we're going to do very soon here is we're going to start creating links. And notice when we start to create links, they're inside of a tag in the form of an attribute. So that's why it becomes important, right? So tags, elements, and attributes. Now we started doing some text formatting already. We already played with the headings. And as I said, there's 6 levels from H1 down to H6. I find the first 3 the most useful, right? But there's also like importance placed on them. So if you have a heading level 1, it's considered important, and an H2 is less important, and an H3 is less important. Why? Because there's subheadings, right? That's kind of the thinking on it. Paragraphs, that's where we put most of our words. So that's where we, like the majority of our content that's written will go into a paragraph structure typically. We have some other elements where we can actually style some of our text, and we have a couple different ways to bold stuff and a couple different ways to italic stuff. And not to get really deep in the weeds as to why we have 2 different formats, but the original way we used to do it was like this. And then about 20 years ago, they came up with this, saying that it has a different semantic meaning than just making something bold. But the truth is you can use either one interchangeably. And then the same thing becomes true for italics, where you can use either the M tag for emphasis or the I tag for italics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our code and I'm going to do a little bit of each, right? And you should try this. So I think I'm going to come right here to where it says Green Bay Packers, and I'm going to use the B tag to make that bold. But notice what the editor did is it put the closing tag right after it. And I do have a little bit of a pet peeve with that. So I have to pick it up and move it. And it kind of figured out where it should go, but I'm going to manually put it there. So there's an example of making the Green Bay Packers bold. And then, I don't know, let's also make Green Bay, Wisconsin bold, but we'll use the strong tag to make that bold, and we'll say Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'll also do some italics here. So I don't know where I should put these. Maybe Curly Lambeau, we can make him italics. So we'll just put italics around his name. And then we can do George Whitney Calhoun using the EM tag, which is the alternate form for doing italics, which I'm going to put at the end of his name here. And you can see how that autocomplete is kind of cool. Like if you're writing the content, because it puts both tags in there and you can just start typing. But then when you already have content, it's kind of an annoyance, so there's like benefits and detractions from doing that. All right. I'm going to save my work back over to the web browser and hit that page. And now we are refreshing again. Notice the bold. So this one is the bold tag. That one's the strong tag. This one's the italics tag. And this one's the M tag, but functionally the same output. All right. So those are some basic ones that I think are pretty important to get using immediately. I can give you some examples here, and then you can read up on this stuff if you wish as well. Another structure that we put on web pages are what we call lists. And you know what? They have an example here. So like if you wanted to try this, you can copy this whole structure from the page, by the way, and then just change the words. So we're going to look at basically two different types of list structures. So in order to look at a list, I think it's probably helpful to build a structure for it. So let's come back over here. And then at the bottom here, I might do something like, I'll create an H3 because I think that's what they did in their example. And I'm not going to do famous players. I think I'm going to do NFC North teams. Okay. And then I'm going to create a structure for what we call an unordered list, which is the tag for it is UL. The editor automatically closed it for me. Now, it is completely blowing me away here with its autocomplete, and I have a hard time not pressing the tab key to accept it. So I'm going to, right? Because also in the interest of time, we're running out of time really, really fast. So we create the UL tag, and then inside of it, we create what we call list items with the LI tag. So we open the tag and close it. And really, we should have one more here where it should have the Green Bay Packers. And so an unordered list, folks, looks like this. I just saved my page. I am going back to the browser now to look, and I'm refreshing. So an unordered list, this is my H3, and this is my unordered list. So an unordered list is a list with bullet points. Okay. So that's an example of what we call an unordered list. Unordered lists are kind of an interesting structure because in the old days of the web, they were the primary place where you would put your navigation. Just make sure that all the tags that you create, so the whole UL structure has to have an opening and a closing, and then each list item has to have an opening and a closing. Right. The next example is the ordered list. So I'm just going to go back to my code here, and I'm going to make this really simple on myself, and you should do the same. Is we're just going to repeat this list. We're simply going to change the outside tag to an OL, which stands for ordered list. And an ordered list, so I'm going to do a save on this and go back to the browser once again and hit the page and refresh. And at the bottom here, you'll see that an ordered list becomes numbered. So instead of a generic looking bullet, I have a numbered list. Okay, so these are what I call the two primary list structures inside of HTML. There is a third list structure, and I'm going to see if I can find it here. Yeah, and they call this a description list. Now, I'm not going to necessarily demonstrate this one, but I just want to let you guys see if you wanted to experiment with this. It's pretty easy to do because you can come here and you can actually use their try it yourself editor. This is one of the cool things about this website, right? Is they have code for you to play with, and you can come in here and just change the stuff and then run it, and it will change the output on the other screen. What a definition list is it creates this output, and you can see it from the editor, right? Where the structure gets put inside the DL tags. We have a DT tag, which is the term hypothetically we're defining. And then we have a definition, a DD tag, which shows what it is. But you see how it kind of formats itself. So we have a term, and then the next line is indented, a term, the next line is indented. And while this is a list structure inside of HTML, I really don't find a lot of people using it. So that's why I'm kind of glossing over it. But what I will tell you is if you wanted to add this to your page, like you could just copy this right from their website and bring it directly into your editor and drop it in. And yeah, the formatting kind of broke, but whatever. I can fix that, right? You guys are watching me fix it here. And then I can save it, go back to the browser and refresh. And now I can see a definition list on my web page. This one's not required for the assignment. Everything else that we've done is required, by the way. Okay, so there's a definition list if you want to play with it. Not required. So whatever, moving on. Back over to the lecture notes here. So we did our lists. And now we're going to try some links. And this is kind of like our introduction to linking. With linking is pretty important. I will talk about this more next week because I don't think we'll be able to get deep enough tonight on it, but we'll try. One of the magic things of the web is being able to link to something. The general form for linking to something is to use an anchor tag, which is basically the letter A. I don't know why they came up with this idea. Like mostly when they were creating web pages originally, they would put a ton of content on one page and they would put in what they call anchor links, where they would name objects and then you could bounce around the page. So you might have like a list of topics at the top, right? And you could click the topic you want and it bounces you down to the part of the page that you want to get to. That's what an anchor link technically is. But they leverage the anchor link to be able to link to external content as well. So the way that you link to external content is to use the anchor tag, and then you add what we call an href attribute, which stands for hypertext reference, if you really care, right? But it's got to say href, all lowercase, and then inside a set of double quotes, the exact and full web address of where you want to go. And then inside the element of the anchor tag, so like inside the beginning and closing tags, the text or image that you place there will become the link, right? So we'll start with text, and real frankly, it's okay. Like if you want to just copy this and put it on your web page, you could. So I'm going to do that. And really, what would be better? It really should take us to the Green Bay Packers homepage, but whatever, right? So this will have a full web address inside of an anchor tag that will say go to Google. All right. Because I want to demonstrate a couple of other types of tags, right? Let's try this one first. I'm going to save this, go back to my browser, bring up that tab, refresh the page, right? You see the workflow here? You make your edit, you save, back to the browser, refresh, and you see the result. Now notice, this isn't beautiful, but I have a link down here at the bottom, and yeah, my annotation tool is kind of blocking it. But if I click on that, it does take me to Google. Then I can go to the back button, and it brings me back to my page. All right, so this is a link to an external site. You can link up to whatever site you want. Like if you were doing a gaming page, you might want to link to like the gaming, I don't know, Discord or something. I don't know, whatever. Doesn't matter what you link to. The point is you got to put at least one link on the page that can take us somewhere else. Right. Next thing that we're going to do, and I'm trying to follow the structured lecture materials here, is that you can also link to a page within your own folder structure. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to create a new page. So inside, and mind you, I'm doing this inside of Visual Studio Code now. I'm going to open up the Explorer sidebar. I'm currently inside the Unit 2 folder, right? And I know that because here I am on the index file. So I'm going to come up here to the toolbar and notice how it says new file. And then I'm going to name it. I'm going to use the example that they have, about. So all lowercase .html. And here it is. Now, in the interest of really speeding things up, I'm going to start doing a doc type thing, and I'm going to let it auto-complete some stuff for me. And yeah, I'm just going to let it auto-complete some stuff, and I'm just going to accept it. Okay, so here's the thing, though. I'm going to just rename this page about, and I know you guys, you should really do all this manually. And I'm just going to put one paragraph in here. Yeah, I'm going to turn on my word wrap because obviously my stuff is wrapping way too much. And I'm going to get rid of all these words. And I'm just going to, so this is filler content for now, because really we're not worried about the content here yet. We're just making a page and putting something on the screen, right? And then we're calling this about, right? And it says about the Green Bay Packers. I guess that title is fine. All right. So I'm going to save this, but here's our task. From the index page, I'm going to create a link to the about page. And then from the about page, I'm going to create a link back to the index page, right? Now, I'm going to do this up near the top of the page. So I have a heading 2, and then Green Bay Packers. And then I think right here is where I'm going to put it for now. Now, we'll talk about what we call semantic structure eventually. But for now, what I am going to create is just another paragraph. So I'm just creating a blank paragraph. I'm closing that paragraph. And I'm really not liking the feel of the autocomplete right now. I'm just telling everybody that, full disclosure. And what I'm going to put right here is I'm just going to create an anchor tag. I'm putting it inside the paragraph, and I'm splitting the paragraph on purpose so that we can focus on the anchor tag. And now this like autocomplete is really kind of driving me nuts. I'll be real honest here. Okay, so I'm going to start typing the letter A, and then I'm going to type href equals a set of double quotes. I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to say about here. Inside those double quotes, and you notice this is like auto-completing so much, it's bizarre, right? It's recognizing that I have a file called about.html, so I'm going to press my tab key and accept it. But otherwise, you should type this out. I want you to notice that because this file is in the same folder as the index file, it will find it. All right. So because I've created this here, I'm going to copy this whole paragraph. So Control C to copy. I'm going to go over to my about page. And then for right now, I'll just put it at the bottom. I'll paste in that paragraph. And I do want to link, but I don't want to link to the about page from the about page. I want to link to the index page. So I'm going to type index here, and I'm going to call that home. Okay. And this isn't very pretty right now, but this will be functional. I do want you to notice another interesting feature here. I have now 2 files that are unsaved. Both of them have circles. There is a feature here in the menu where I can save all of them at the same time. How do you like that? So both of them are saved. Pretty slick, right? So if you made edits to 10 pages all at once, you hit one button, you save them all. All right, now back to the browser. We will refresh our page. You will notice that there's an about link at the top. I'm going to click on it, and it takes me to my about page. On the about page, I have a home link, and I'm going to click and take us back to the home page. So the goal with the links, at least as we start, is to have one link to take us somewhere else, right? And then 2 pages where I can link back and forth between 2 pages in my own folders. All right. There's a bunch more stuff we're going to be adding to this, folks. So don't freak out. We are at time already, but I think I have about 5 to 10 minutes more of material I want to complete here. You are free to go if you need to go, but I'm going to keep recording to make sure the content is fully recorded. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the next entry here. So we did both of these, what we call an absolute URL to an outside location, and then what we call a relative URL. And what is the URL relative to? My own folder structure. So if I'm sitting on a page and I just list the page as a link, that page is in the same folder. If it would happen to be in a different folder, then I have to give it a different set of instructions. We'll talk about how to do that, but that'll come down the road. The next thing that we're going to do, and this is kind of the fun part, right, is to add an image to our page, right? So I'm going to show you like a way to get an image first, and then I'll show you how to add an image to your page, right? So first thing is, let's go find an image, right? So normally what I tell my students, and I will do a whole thing about images and graphics and stuff like that, is when it comes to putting images on a web page, there is nothing better than creating your own images. And I know for some people it's like, but I'm not an artist, I'm a coder. All right. Well, there's the internet and there's stock photos and stuff like that. And hey, do you have a smartphone? You can probably snap a picture with it and get it on your webpage. If you're a graphic artist, you can generate stuff from scratch, but we're going to use a much simpler technique here. I'm going to go to Google. I am going to do an image search, right? And I'm going to just search, I don't know, Green Bay Packers, right? It's a hot topic. And these are some of the images I'm coming up with. I want to find something that is, and be mindful of this as you're finding images. I want something that is safe to use, right? That there's no copyright attached to. Now, granted, we're doing this for educational purposes. So we get a pass on like copyright laws because we're not using it to make money. So we're learning how to do stuff. But generally speaking, when you're creating content for the web, please don't steal people's stuff, right? It's uncool and frankly illegal, right? And organizations will come after you with their big teams of lawyers and sue you for stealing their content. I'm not kidding. That happens all the time on the internet. Now, we're doing this for educational purposes only. So I'm just trying to find an image that I think is, I don't know. That one looks pretty cool. So here's what I'm going to do. See, I clicked on this image. Right now, I'm just going to right click that image and I'm going to select this option, which is save image as. I don't know how this is going to download. So right now it's coming down as a JPEG file. This is right now going to, it's going to my bills paid folder. Not good. I'm just going to put this directly into the folder where I need it. All right. So we'll talk about a best way to manage this in the future. But for right now, what I want you to do is put it in the same folder with your web page files. Right. This is not really best practice, but it's what we're doing right now. You guys got me on that? And this one's called HQ720 JPEG. So I'm going to just click save on it. All right. Now I'm going to go into Visual Studio Code and I notice that my image is there. See it? It is there. So now at the very bottom of my page, and you know what? I'm going to do this on my index page and I'm going to do it right below the link. I'm going to just type the image tag, which is IMG. And then we will do the SRC attribute equals open double quotes. And then inside those double quotes, I'm going to put in that file name exactly as it appears, right? So it can't be upper lowercase different or anything like that. So this is HQ720. Notice it's finding it. So I'm going to hit the tab key and just accept it. Another required thing that when you put an image on a page is that you include an alt attribute. So I'm going to accept what it's putting in there. If you don't know what to put in there, usually what you should put in here is the description of the image that the user would see if the image happens not to load. That's what we normally put there. Right. So for right now, I'm going to say Lambeau Field. That's probably not the best one. Right. Now, believe it or not, that's all we need to do to get an image on the page. There's other attributes we can add, but we'll deal with those down the road. Right now, we just want to get a sense of satisfaction, like, wow, there's an image on my page. Right. So we saved our code. I'm going back over to the browser window, and here I go reloading, and there's the image. Now, granted, this image is kind of big. Right. So we'll talk about that too. So if you get an image, and I'm just warning you, you might go find an image out online and discover that it's like 5,000 pixels by 10,000 pixels, and it is way bigger than your browser can handle. So what you might want to do when you're searching for an image is you can actually use the tools here and then find smaller images. And normally, like when you find an image, and I'm just going to give you an example here, it'll tell you right down here what the size of it is. We will talk about what's acceptable, but usually a few hundred pixels by a few hundred pixels is okay. When it gets up into the thousands, it's usually too big for a web screen.
Hi,
Yes,
can I interrupt?
absolutely.
Make sure that you're just using pictures that aren't copyrighted. If you go over there and you see tools on the right, um, go back to the search
Yes.
tools and then usage rights, and you can choose Creative Commons is usually a safe bet.
Yep. And so and Rachel's pointing this out, and Rachel, I do a whole thing on this later on when we talk
Oh,
about this.
sorry, stealing your thunder.
No, it's quite all right because really you'll notice now that I've turned on this, basically we're looking at images of people's like shirts, right? Like I took a picture of my t-shirt. Yes, it contains the Green Bay logo and still technically that's copyrighted, but it's a little bit different. These are like photos that somebody put out there that they don't care about the copyright on it. They don't want to earn money off of it. It's just out on the internet. And when they're under the Creative Commons license, you can just use it and there's no catch. Anything else, right? And most of the stuff that is commercial, people own this and they will hunt it down. They will hunt you down with your lawyers and send them after you. Remember, academic work, we usually get a pass, but you got to be very, very careful about that stuff. All right. So get an image on your page, folks, and then that pretty much covers the content here. What we're going to do next time we get together is we're going to ramp up all these skills. But if you've accomplished all of these tasks, your next task would be to take the folder that you created, right? And really actually the stuff inside the folder, highlight it all, right click, and compress it to a zip file. Submit the zip file. If you feel ambitious, you can try to upload your work to the web server and send me a link. Not required for unit 2, but subsequent units we will. So when we come back next week, one of the first things we'll do is we'll upload it and get that to work. But for now, I just want a zip file. I just want you to get comfortable coding and just do the basic coding that we've done. Next week, we will add a lot of stuff to it. All right. So that's going to end this video session here today.